Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our impromptu version of Oklahoma Football Live. My name is Jason Ray, and I'll be with you probably for the next hour. As we typically, as you guys know, we typically go live on Friday mornings from 11:30 to 12:30. But with everything that broke last night, felt like it was important to go live with you guys today to talk about everything related to the CALE GUNDY announcement. So just a couple of ground rules on my perspective. I'm Before we kind of start, I'm not going to really get into any debate in terms of the word that he used. Whether or not it should or should not be tolerated, what that looks like. Basically, from my perspective, I'm going to go into some of the facts of what I know within the situation, and then talk about the impacts that is going to have on this team going forward, um, recruiting for, most importantly for the 2023 cycle again going forward, and any what's the aftermath of this, and then certainly what does it look like for a potential permanent replacement. So before we do that, please come follow me at Jason Ray 1. As we talked about, we've talked about fall camp stuff. We've talked about our position previews, and we'll probably start talking a little bit about special teams on Friday as we conclude our positional breakdown of this team this year. So if you haven't watched those videos, go back and watch. Hit the subscribe button, and share this with your friends. We'll get started in earnest here in a minute or two. Just let some more people join. We've got 24 on the line so far. Just let some people join. Oklahoma had their first open practice in fall camp today, so I'll have a little bit of just broad information about kind of what's going on from a camp perspective, and then any questions or comments certainly that you guys have related to, obviously, our most importantly is the CALE GUNDY resignation that happened late last night around 11 p.m. Between 10:30 and 11 p.m. is when all the social media stuff started going off. So let's start a little bit with the facts as I know them right here. Obviously, I think you guys have all read CALE's social media post where he went into very much painstaking detail on on the situation. Those that haven't seen that, he said that in a team meeting, and I've come to find out that this happened on Thursday. So in a team meeting where one of the individuals maybe wasn't paying as close attention in the film session as he would expect. And those that know CALE GUNDY, he is very, very demanding. He's very much an old school coach. In that manner, he expects a lot from his players, and he demands a lot from his players. So the fact that the individual was distracted or wasn't necessarily paying as close attention or taking notes at the level that he needs to, obviously was something that caught CALE's eye. Read out loud the note that was being placed on that individual's iPad, and then obviously from that, we know he uttered an inappropriate word. So there's where we're at. From what I've been able to gather, I think from things that I've heard this morning, it was a situation where I think the coaches and the players internally on this year's team were in a position where they felt good about, they felt very united and strong about Cale continuing to serve in his current capacity. But I think this made it to the administration. Administration decided to do what they felt like they needed to do at this time. Um, so those are the facts in terms of kind of what led to that. I think what you've seen this morning and through the early hours this morning, even some late last night, was really just an outpouring of support for Cale in terms of former players. So I saw Joe Mixon come out. I saw Rodney Anderson come out. I saw Dede Westbrook come out, and there's a few other ones as well that have provided that support for Cale. And it's just it's a heart wrenching situation for Cale individually, but I think for this team and for the program. Most of you guys know, but Cale is the longest tenured coach on staff. Obviously, he's been part of this program uninterrupted since 1999. Obviously, this would have been his 23rd year. Going into this as his 23rd year, a guy that's really coached everything except offensive line on the offensive side of the ball. He's been quarterback coach, running backs. Tight end, H backs, wide receiver, special teams. So a guy that's coached so many different position groups, and for me personally, is a guy that I feel that based on the timing of when this happened, even a bigger blow than a bigger blow than Riley leaving, based on the timing in which it happened, with this being the second week in August, a little over 3 weeks until the first game, and so the difficulty in being able to get a very a solid permanent running backs, or I'm sorry, wide receivers coach in here will be very interesting. I think it's very intriguing to follow. But like I said, just a heartbreaking situation um, for this team, this program, and for Cale and his wife and his family. A guy that very truly bleeds crimson and cream for Oklahoma. Obviously, not in the greatest period for Oklahoma football, but still was a very good quarterback for Oklahoma. And then I'd mentioned the years and years of service that he's brought to the University of Oklahoma. So let's talk a little bit. And I know there's a lot of comments in here, and I'll get to all of them, and discuss what you what you want to what you'd like to talk through this morning. And so when you look at impact, so on this team, this year, obviously offensive analyst LaDamian Washington has moved over to an interim role, coaching the wide receivers, a guy that's has experience at the University of Missouri, has experience, coaching wide receivers both on the field and in the off the field type of role. So he's going to be charged with keeping the wheels on the bus, so to speak. And so we'll see what that looks like. Now I will say I wouldn't bet on the fact that in any capacity that Gundy has the opportunity to return. I mean, I think probably at this point, what's done is done. The decision will be the decision, but I wouldn't completely rule it out based on the outpouring of support that he's received and certainly will continue to receive as part of that. As part of that support for him in the system. But let's operate under the assumption that he'll not be asked to return. So there's a couple of other there's impacts obviously to this team, and then obviously recruiting. If you follow Jaquays Petaway on social media, he was a little shocked and surprised, obviously, as all of us were, and looked to be a little bit upset. So I don't know that there. I mean, there's going to have to be some re-recruitment of him without a doubt. Just in terms of, I don't think there's an imminent um, decommit coming. All signs point to him kind of, from what I've heard, him kind of still kind of taking a step back and evaluating the situation and not necessarily making any decisions right now. But you've got him, you've got Anthony Evans, who is scheduled to come in on the 26th, or make his decision on the 26th. And you just got a couple other wide receivers that you're really kind of interested in seeing exactly what happens. So I think recruiting is. I mean, he's a dynamic recruiter. Obviously he was really big on getting that trio of 5 stars into Norman a few years ago with Trajan Bridges, Jaden Hazelwood, and Theo Weiss. So that remains to be seen, but he was a great recruiter. I think when you also look at like I said, moving forward, who's a potential candidate to get this job long term. I think when you look at it initially, I think the name that comes to people's mind is Malcolm Kelly. I think there's some fences that need to be mended particularly between Jerry Schmidt and Malcolm Kelly. I think there's a little bit of bad blood between those two, just because of just some things, how things kind of went down towards the end of his career at Oklahoma. You've seen D.D. Westbrook is actually out at the Sooners practice today, so I don't necessarily know exactly what to make of that. But he was one of those that also gave an outpouring of support, or maybe it's someone else, or maybe they decide, okay, we'll keep Washington in this interim role, for the season, then identify another guy, postseason, just because of the fact of how difficult it is to find someone at this point in time. So, and you don't want to just get anyone just to get someone. So just because that individual obviously has to learn the offense, and learn the culture and everything that's with this Brent Venables regime. So so overall, just really I mean, I don't there's so many emotions that kind of go through I mean, frustrating is really not the word, but just a bad day for Oklahoma football last night and even today, and it'll be something that that lingers and goes forward. I think you see, you've seen this a little bit in some of the clips that I've seen. I think you've got a little bit of a pissed off football team right now. I don't know if there's any anger or it's just intense or what it is, but there's just a couple of situations where the kids have already had to get separated, and some of their, what they call their W drill, which is fairly similar to the Oklahoma drill. So now we'll just kind of talk through your comments and questions and anything you have, and then and if you guys have any topics that you would want to discuss, even if it's outside of this, feel free um, to bring those, and we'll talk through that. Kale jumped on the grenade to save everyone else. I hate it, but it is what it is. I don't know, Ryan. I don't know if that's necessarily the way I would put it, by jumping on a grenade. But I don't know. I don't know as much about the details. Like I said, what I've heard was that the players and the coaching staff were willing. It wasn't necessarily his words. He just kind of slipped up and said the word. So I think from that perspective, and his pedigree that he's had over 23 years has provided a little bit of cred, a street cred, so to speak, just in terms of what he's been able to do. So yeah, John, there's been, as I mentioned, and some of these comments are a little bit dated, so excuse me as I'm going through these. But yeah, a lot of players have come out in his defense. Previous players. I've not really seen a ton of current players right now, and maybe they've been put on a little bit of a gag order, so to speak, in terms of um, in terms of, not really saying anything publicly right now. But yeah, like I said, you've got a lot of people that have come out: Rodney Anderson, Joe Mixon, um, Dede Westbrook, Ryan Broyles. And really, he didn't really come out and say something, but his was more in a comment on the Instagram post. But yeah, yeah, there's a lot of people that have come out in his defense right now. I'm not really seeing a single person that's come out and said, "Yeah, that's not really surprising. That's kind of what I would expect for him." It's really just the opposite, and kind of a 180. So we'll see how that goes. If that, public sentiment sometimes goes a long ways. Like I said, if I'm looking at things, here from the outside looking in, I don't necessarily expect, the situation where he's able to return. But the public opinion and public sentiment is sometimes a very, very powerful thing um, as well. So as we go through these, any type of comments here or questions, I'm not really going to show if it's if it's controversial, in nature. But any specific questions that you have, like moving forward, um, is is something that we'll discuss here. So let's see. Let's go through this. Go through any questions. Yeah. So just in general, here, Jr. I'm not sure exactly what the angle is specifically related to this topic, but I think just in general, with everything college football, I myself don't really watch a ton of NFL anymore. It's not necessarily that I'm stopping watching it for any specific reason. I just like the college game better. I've just always liked the college game. Now I think there's some people that are starting to get a little bit soured on the college game related to like transfer portal type of stuff, related to NIL type of stuff. But what I've always tried to do, JR, and just for everybody, is I've always tried to separate the two. I love the game for the game. I I take all the other things out of consideration, um, all of the extra stuff, and I watch the game and support Oklahoma, and then obviously just being a big college football fan just in general for the game, and I take the other thing, the other stuff, out of it completely. Um, Um, how do other so this is a good question, John. I've not heard anything specifically, really just in terms of the individual player that wrote these things. You know, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know who it is. I don't think I've not seen anybody release who the player is, and I don't think it'll probably get released. But I'm sure there's a certain amount of frustration. I think there's probably a certain amount of frustration that individual was doing that, as opposed to kind of being dialed in and paying attention, that on what's going on. So I would say there's a certain amount of you know maybe a small amount of animosity. But what I've learned, I think most of you guys know this. I coach high school basketball. Kids are resilient. Kids are much more resilient than we are as adults, in a lot of ways, just in general. So, there may be some disgruntlement or things like that now, but I don't think it's anything long term or, incredibly impactful that you'll see, going forward. Now you may see this in the first couple of days here with pads being on and a little bit more aggression, and things like that than we've seen. But I think, the dust will settle, and these are 18, 21-year-old kids that understand, and as Brent Venables has always said, keep the main thing, and I think they'll move forward in a positive way because of this. But I will say this is the one thing that I think I said this last week with Mark, or maybe in another discussion, that it's been very much sunshine and roses since Brent Venables was named head coach. They had an outstanding finish to the recruiting class, the 2022 recruiting class. They kept that momentum into the spring, had a really good spring. They've the spring game was the highest attended spring game in the country, over 70,000 there. They've went through an off season where there's not been any injury situation, or there's not been any trouble from a lawful perspective, and so this is the first little bit of adversity that this coaching staff and this team has faced, outside of, obviously there's not been a game, but really there's been this. It's been perfect until now, and so it'll be interesting for me to see how the players, how the coaching staff, um, how Brent Venables himself is able to navigate this and overcome this as a first year head coach. And it's not something that you anticipate, obviously, as being a first year head coach, in terms of being something that you um, being something that you anticipate as something that you're going to face, a challenge that you're going to have. So it'll be interesting in the coming days and weeks on how this team and staff reacts to this adversity. Um, Matt Bingham, I'll answer the second question. There's almost 0% chance that Dennis Simmons would ever come back. Like he chose to be, um, he chose to go with Riley and be part of that USC program. So I doubt very seriously that he'll come back. Malcolm Kelly, yep. So Matt, from what some of the things that I've read and heard was that um, he he didn't feel like Schmitty did him any services and caused him with some of the workout regimens that he had prior to his pro day, and had a little bit of a lackluster pro day, and has really kind of blamed Schmitty because of that. So I don't know if that's still something. That's just something that I heard that's popped up, that maybe the relationship's not in great standing. So I don't know, what the details are. Maybe it's something that's been brushed off, but I think at some point that that's part of that conversation if he was to be asked to come to Oklahoma. LaDamian Washington, as I mentioned, used to be at Missouri. Um, you know, and like I said, he was a wide receiver coach. Sorry, I'm just reading a couple of tweets here as we're going through. I think he's a guy that's serviceable. I don't know that at this point in his career, like, he's necessarily, the right choice to be a full time staff member yet, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I think they'll try to identify someone else, but um, we'll see that. We'll see that come. And just a tweet that I saw was interesting. So, and I'll just read it to you guys right there. Sooner fans, we need to embrace ourselves because I believe Kale is going to be on the sidelines in Stillwater or a rival SEC school as early as this season, and how we're going to feel about that. I don't envision us taking that very well, and I think that's a very, very valid point. That he's going to get a job. I mean, he's going to get a big time job because he is he's very, very well respected, and he's done a tremendous job um, in the 23 years that he's been here. So um, that's going to be a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people watching him. One of the most beloved um, coaches, from an assistant coach perspective ever at this university, and part of tons of one of the most winningest coaches that Oklahoma's ever had in the history of the program. So it's yeah, that's going to be a hard pill to swallow for all of us that that follow this program or watch him. Oh, okay, Ryan. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm with you now. Yeah, no, that I agree. Yeah, and I think I don't know what happened behind closed doors. I think he was probably um, I believe it was probably a forced resignation from what I've heard. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't think in any situation, if you're given the choice, you're going to resign over obviously being fired. But yeah, I think stepping out of that was and not creating more of a distraction was just a true testament to the character of Kale, without a doubt. Um, Ryan, I imagine the thing that hurts the most for a guy like Kale is that he is the focus instead of the team. I assume you will want absolutely would not agree. I could not agree more. That's the kind of that's the kind of guy. So Blake, thanks for the question. How bad will the receiving core be shaken throughout the year, and how bad will this effective offense as a whole? Hopefully, this kid gets hit harder than usual in practice and no. I think Blake. I think as I mentioned before, I think kids are very, very resilient these days. I think it's not as um, I don't think. I mean, yeah, there's going to be a transitional period right now. I think early on, but I think just seeing how this may go forward will be interesting. But I think you get the dust settle over a few days, and I think the kids will start being the kids will start moving past this and understanding. Yeah, it's a horrible situation, but at the end of the day, they've got a job to do, and they've got to find a way to move forward. So. Justin Broyles would be great. I assume you mean Ryan Broyles, but yeah, no, he would be. I don't know what kind of, um, I don't know what kind of coach that Ryan would be, but yeah, I think absolutely. Um, yeah, Blake, I think it's a possibility. The problem is with a guy like D.D. Westbrook, absolutely no coaching experience, whatsoever. He's young. Now, what I could see, honestly, Blake, is if they decide, that they don't have a ton of good options in terms of someone that could be in a permanent role early on. Here, understanding there's 3 weeks to go, until the season, a little bit smaller window for some other teams that are playing in that. Um, I'm sorry, it's a little bit. I think it's a little bit more than 3 weeks. But when you look at less than 3 weeks for the week zero teams, so it will be. it'll be fun. I think it'll be fun and intriguing to look and see, um, what that looks like. So if they feel like they can go forward this year with Damian Washington, could certainly see them elevating him, more on, maybe make it more of a permanent thing, and then you could see potentially bringing in Aditi Westbrook as a analyst as well. So yeah, that's a very distinct possibility. Let's see. So, like I said, if there's any commentary here that's even remotely, racist in a way, that could be, perceived as a little bit. I'm not going to, discuss it or entertain anything like that at this point. So, any questions that you have just overall about the situation or um, comments about that, without a doubt. We'll talk through any other questions that you have related to, how Oklahoma moves on. We'll have some tidbits from practice today. Probably we'll do that more on Friday. I think just overall, just generally speaking, the intensity is really really high. I don't know that that's necessarily a direct result of what's happened here last night, but I think um, I think when you look at that, um, you love to see the intensity. I think that's something that's been missing for a while. But there's a ton of intensity. You've seen that. It's hard not to under BV, but I think that's going to continue to be a thing to how intense these practices are and how difficult these practices are, and what you see out of the aggressiveness for some of these kids. So. TR, thanks for the question. How do you think this affects recruiting? It absolutely, sorry, let me get myself untongue tied. It absolutely affects recruiting. So I mentioned a couple of guys, Jaquays Petaway, who, I think it's a little bit of a wavering commitment. I would anticipate. So I think Oklahoma will to do a good job and talking through that with him, and trying to, reaffirm his commitment to Oklahoma at this point. And so, it's going to continue to affect, obviously probably won't, even to a certain degree, the 2024 and maybe even 2025 kids that Kale was in on. But I think more so these 2023 kids as well. I think Anthony Evans is another guy that has been. I think he's making his commitment, or making his announcement, I should say, on the 26th. But I think that'll be very intriguing to watch to see how this impacts that in certain ways. So I wanted to skip to this comment or this question here. He's still committed to Oklahoma, so there's nothing to get back, unless something's broken in the last 30 minutes that I've not seen. But he's still, he's still committed to Oklahoma. He's not. He's still got the University of Oklahoma on his Twitter bio. So he's still there. Yeah, he did change his photo, but he's still got Oklahoma. So I think it's very much in flux, but I don't think there's a decommitment that's happened right now. And I think there's another question here on some of the locks. So we've seen a couple. Vasic or Vasic was one of them. I'm not sure the pronounce it. I think it's Vasic was one of them. Um, I think you've got a couple of more. Um, a couple of more coming. You've got Makari Vickers. let's start. Let me step back a bit. August 15th, you got Jacoby Johnson. Um, he was one of the, I believe he was one of the locks. I think he makes that decision to Oklahoma on the 13th. You've got a couple of commitments on the 26th. You've got Evans, as we spoke about. I think everything I've heard has been trending Oklahoma. Will be interesting to see how how that is impactful over the next 2.5 weeks. I think you see, and then you've got Makari Vickers, who is a guy. So I don't think Evans was a lock, but I do think Vickers and Jacoby Johnson were locks. So, and then you go. I think you've got Jordan Raynaud, who was one of the locks. I think he commits probably in the October-November timeframe, and I've heard differing opinions, so to speak, on DJ Hicks. I've heard some people that feel like, yeah, he was a lock coming out of that. And then I've heard some people it's not necessarily a lock, but it's pretty close to a lock. So I think all signs point to him still committing in that December-January timeframe. However, I've heard some rumors that he may be interested in committing a little bit earlier than that. So keep an eye on that. So I don't know necessarily that he's a complete lock yet, but we'll see. We'll see what that looks like. So Ryan, how do I feel personally about CALE getting pushed out? If you're willing to talk about it, I don't think the punishment fits the crime. I think it's hard, for me as a white man to have a solid opinion, one way or the other. I think you have to put a lot of things into consideration in terms of the 23 years of service that he's provided to this university. With the outpouring of support that he has received from former players, even former coaches. Bob Stoops came out and made a positive comment about him and what he's given to the University of Oklahoma. But I think personally, if you have buy-in within the team, if you have buy-in within the coaches, if it was a very consistent, united front that, yes, this was a one-time slip and a mistake that shouldn't overcome or shouldn't overarch, so to speak, the 23 years that he's been exemplary, then yeah, I tend to think that he probably should have been allowed to stay. Probably should have been something that should be handled internally within the program, the football program, and not at the administrative level. But we don't know everything that's happened. Maybe there's some that just really did not want him to be part of this team going forward, knowing what that, if you've got dissension within the locker room, then I think the best decision the decision that was made is probably the best decision. But if you don't have division, within the locker room, and everybody is very much on the same front, on the same field, just in terms of just the support or lack thereof, then there seems to be a little bit something that we're missing as part of the story that maybe we're not aware of. So that's kind of my view on that. So anyways, I'll go ahead and shut this down if there's not any other any other questions or comments. Hope as we get to Friday we can we can move forward and talk about the team and instead of let's not linger on this as much as we as much as we can. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just a sad period for University of Oklahoma overall. Obviously there's no winners um, in this situation, um, but yeah, no, I think absolutely. We'll see how things go. If I were to make a prediction, I think based on August 8th, I think that Damian Washington's probably going to be your on-field coach for the remainder of the year. Um, I think you could see somebody like D.D. Westbrook be brought in as an analyst. It's just too much of a distraction, I think, at this time. It's already a distraction a little bit, so to speak. But I think even more so, I think it's a bad distraction, for Venables to take away from his focus on this team, to go and interview coaches and things like that right now, being so close to the season. So I think you'll see him be, and maybe it's still a temp, an interim position, but I think he'll probably be your on-field wide receiver coach for this year, and then we'll see what happens in the offseason. I could be wrong. They may bring someone in, but that's just my feel right now. So thanks for all of you guys that came in and came and chatted. I think we had almost 200 on the line here on a Monday morning, so appreciate you guys so much for everything. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. And we're almost at 5,000 subs right now for this individual channel. So please share this. Come follow me at Jason Ray 1. Let's try to get. I'd love to get this. If we could get up to 5,000 subs by the time football season starts, first game starts. That would be that would be outstanding. So thanks for your support as always, and Boomer Sooner. God bless.